I said recently that every professional in the world of comics has to make 1,000 decisions for every page that they do. So today, for Letterers Appreciation Day, I'm going to take a look at a couple of Tom Orzechowski panels and analyze some of the decisions he made. So today we're going to look at these two panels here from Uncanny X-Men number 100 something or other. Chris Claremont scripted, obviously, John Byrne drawing, Terry Austin inking, and the great Tom Orzechowski doing the lettering. Now, there's nothing wrong with these two panels. They work perfectly fine. They're great examples of Orzechowski's lettering, his design, his layout. It's a little easier for him because John Byrne actually left room at the top of the panels for the lettering to go in. And in fact, I would also suggest that given how much Claremont wrote for those panels and how much space Byrne left in the panels for the lettering, Orzechowski did as much as he could possibly do with these two panels as far as the lettering goes. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. Now, the first thing I want to mention is just overall style and consistency of style. I mean, Tom Orzechowski is not one of those letterers that letters in 10 or 20 different ways. Don't forget, this was also during the hand lettering day when you get out your crow quill pen or something and actually draw the letters on the board. And to that end, it's not like it is today where a letterer will have 20 different font packages sitting in an Illustrator and will choose the one that goes best with that particular series. Tom Orzechowski letters like Tom Orzechowski, especially at this point in what was probably the early 80s or maybe late 70s. So it's his style that you're going to see at work here. The important thing to keep in mind, especially with a longer run on a book like this, is that he just keeps it consistent, and that's definitely what he did. And there's nothing wrong with that because he's got a great style, let's face it. So let's take a look at these two panels. We'll start with the first one, the left one, and we'll draw over a little bit and we'll take a look at what we have here. So the first thing I notice when I look at this panel is that Nightcrawler has a really big balloon of dialogue to say here. It's one, two, three. It's basically three long sentences, or I guess two long sentences. The first one has a colon in the middle, but that's something that you probably could break up into two separate balloons if you had the space for it. Maybe not. I'm not sure. There's for sure, it would be very difficult to make this one balloon into two smaller balloons and to stagger them across the panel appropriately. So I think Orzechowski probably did the right thing here. And in fact, the script originally probably did have it all in one big balloon. So I'm sure, Orzechowski was just following the instructions from the script, and that's all good. So then the question becomes, with your balloons, do you stick them to the panel borders? Do you have them floating freely? And if they do stick to the panel borders, as this particular balloon does do, as it does, do you knock out the panel border at the same time? Now, knocking out the panel border wasn't common practice at this point. In fact, I would probably argue it wasn't all that common until John Workman was doing it over Walt Simonson on The Mighty Thor. And to be quite honest, off the top of my head, I'm not sure what the relationship time-wise is between Simonson's Thor run and Byrne's X-Men run. I think Simonson's Thor came a little bit after, but I think John Workman really paved the way on that one, but I'll let the lettering historians correct me on that if I'm wrong. So I think with that first balloon, again, did the best that he could. It really wasn't something that you could break up. He had a certain amount of space. I think breaking up the border here would be inconsistent with a lot of his other work. And I think, honestly, there's so much of that panel that would disappear, it probably doesn't make much sense to do it that way. So the next question, or the next thing to point out is, there's Kitty, who's just waking up from being asleep or being knocked out, having been attacked. And she's got these two balloons where she's kind of just waking up and she kind of mumbles a little bit at the beginning, and then she says, "Who? Kurt?" after that. And that's another one of those decisions that Todd Klein has to make. Do you make a special balloon for this? And in this case, he did. And it's a great balloon. It works perfectly to mimic the way that Kitty Pryde is talking with those wavy, wiggly lines there. It is great, and the lettering itself is a little bit smaller, so you get the idea of her voice being a little weak and being a little bit shaky, just because of the interplay between the size of the lettering and the shape of the balloons. So that works out really cool. Even the balloon tail itself has that little wiggling thing that goes towards her mouth. So that works beautifully. Not too much more you could have done with this anyway, I don't think. Maybe Who and Kurt could go in separate balloons if you really wanted to go crazy. There's room for it there. You could put it over Kurt's right shoulder if you wanted to, but I think just keep it simple, straightforward, and have the balloons all line up along the left panel border works fine. That's something else you could actually pick apart here. Why aren't those balloons floating freely? Why are those balloons touching the left panel border? Couldn't we move those off a little bit to the right and have them be free floating? Maybe, but again, out of consistency's sake, all the other balloons that you see in these two panels, and as I recall much of Orzechowski's run on Uncanny X-Men, they often touched a panel border. They weren't floating freely. They're always attached somewhere along the outside. So that is consistent, and that works. There's nothing wrong with it. Just saying. So the second panel we'll move to now, this one's a little bit interesting for me because I was reading it a couple times to try to figure out how I thought it worked or if there was a way to make it work better. And that is basically that Kurt has two balloons here, and between the first and second balloon, Kitty interrupts it with her quick exclamation there. So you go from the first panel where she's got the wiggly lines around the balloon to the second panel where she's all of a sudden jumping up into his arms and excited and shouting at him. You see the balloon itself becomes that sort of burst balloon with a straight, jaggedy line. So once again, Orzechowski chooses to show her emotions through the balloon shape, and that works out great. And he goes back to his normal standard lettering and size therein. A couple words get bold-faced along the way. That's fine too. But what I find more interesting than that is the way she breaks up what he's saying. He starts saying something. There's a couple dots there, the ellipses, 3 dots at the end. She interrupts him, and then he goes back to finish the awake at the end of it there. This may be a function of the space being available, but to me it seems almost weird that the interrupting balloon is directly below the balloon that interrupts rather than between that first and second balloon that Nightcrawler is speaking in. And in fact, also oddly, the interrupting balloon is behind the balloon that's being interrupted. If you wanted to give the physical representation of one balloon interrupting the other, it's sort of like one person talking over another person. So you'd almost expect that balloon to be on top of the previous balloon, but in this case it's not. It's almost hidden a little bit. It's behind that balloon. So again, when I read this, it worked for me. I understood it. I followed it perfectly. It worked fine. It's only when I stopped to really think about it that all these questions came to mind. And again, it might just be an issue of how much space there is available. And it does work, so in the end it doesn't matter. But these are all the little decisions that a letterer has to make when they have a blank screen in front of them and a script that has, these 3 lines of dialogue between 2 people. How are you going to break them up? The balloons, how are they going to lay out so that the reader understands what's going on and so that it looks good and, again, fits into the space that's there? I keep going into that space thing, but I think it's really important. The only other thing I notice in Kitty's balloon here is that she's using 2 exclamation points. Or 2 exclamation marks, I guess they're called. And for the most part these days, people always say use 1 or 3, don't use 2. It's just a convention. It's the way people read. It's the way people write a lot. But it just kind of strikes me funny as seeing 2 exclamation marks here. You can even see in Nightcrawler's second balloon there, he uses question mark, exclamation point, question mark. He's got the 3 points of punctuation there, whereas Kitty uses 2 exclamation points, which is exclamation point or exclamation mark? 2 exclamations. 2, as Victor Borge would say. She only uses 2. So that's interesting. I'm imagining that came straight from the script like that, and Orzechowski followed it. And maybe that's one of those things that's changed over time. Maybe that's an internet age thing where we always go for 3s instead of 2s. I'm not sure. But these are all the decisions, and I'm sure there's 100 more I'm not thinking about here, that go into lettering just these 2 panels that I'm showing you here today. Imagine doing this across 5, 6, 8 panels a page, 20 pages an issue, 12 issues a year, just for one series. Most letterers these days do a lot more than one series. And it's exhausting to me just to think about all those decisions being made over and over again. So when you look at lettering, and I do think you should look at lettering, you should notice lettering. just keep in mind, it's not as easy as it looks. It only looks easy because they did it so well. So thank you to all of our letterers, not just Tom Orzechowski, but everyone else whose work we read, whose work we follow, whose stuff we look at over and over again, even when we don't bother thinking about it, as so many people should. Happy National and International Letterers Appreciation Day, everybody. Talk to you again real soon. Today is Letterers Appreciation Day, September 1st, 2017. So I've rolled up my sleeves and we're going to get to work talking a little bit about lettering. If you're watching this on Friday, September 1st, 2017, happy National Letterers Appreciation Day. Better yet, it's International Letterers Appreciation Day. No matter what country you're in, we put no walls up. We don't care about borders. We only care about panels and balloons. You could knock out the borders if you want with the balloon that sticks to the panel.